Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining today's virtual roundtable hosted by Parallel Systems entitled The Future of Autonomous Rail Has Arrived. This event features a group of industry experts and thought leaders who are going to share their perspectives. The event will last for 1 hour. I'm going to invite each one of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we will get into the questions. I'm going to first turn to Matt Soule, who's the founder and CEO of Parallel Systems. Matt?
Thank you, Dan. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Soule. I'm the CEO of Parallel. Parallel is a U.S. innovator and manufacturer of technology to improve rail's addressable market. This is about reducing the drayage expenses and improving service quality so that rail can participate in more of the service freight transportation market. And this also has the added benefits of allowing for public benefit of decongesting highways and realizing lower emissions freight transportation. Very excited to be here today.
Thank you, Matt. Michael Miller, the CEO of G&W. Can you please introduce yourself and give a little bit of your background?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. My name is Michael Miller. I'm the CEO of G&W. And prior to G&W, I worked at Norfolk Southern. And prior to that, I was a shipper at Georgia Pacific. And I started my career in the trucking industry at Railway Express. So kind of had the pleasure of looking at this from a lot of different directions. We have been partnered with Parallel Systems now for, it seems like 5 years. It's probably been less than that. It's probably been 3, but it seems, I think Matt and I started our conversation 5 years ago in Savannah.
That's right.
And we look forward to moving this pilot forward and talking about what we think this technology can do for our industry and for our customers.
Great, thank you. Our next panelist is Mason George from IMC. Mason, if you can please introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mason George, and I am the president of IMC National Accounts. IMC is a drayage company that was founded in 1982, and currently we have over 2,600 trucks nationwide with a heavy presence in Savannah and up and down the East Coast and every other port as well. And Matt and I think originally met in 2017 or 18. I can't remember his first brainchild when it came to this, but was very impressed with the product and hopeful for what this could do to the industry in trucking as well as just international and domestic transportation in the U.S.
Great, thank you. And our next panelist is Erez Agmoni. Erez, if you can please introduce yourself.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. Erez Agmoni. I'm currently a co-founder and general partner at venture capital called Interwoven Ventures, investing in robotic and AI. Prior to that, I was 15 years with Maersk. In the last 4 years with Maersk, global head of innovation. Worked with Matt since my time at Maersk, also currently as well. I'm super impressed with that idea and solution and seeing how is it coming to life and going to change the industry. So definitely looking forward to see it growing and moving and being here on the panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So we're now going to move into the program. I'm going to ask each of our panelists an opening question, and I'm going to encourage the other panelists to jump in and join the conversation if they have relevant points after each question. Matt, the first question is for you. You founded Parallel Systems 5 years ago after spending more than a decade at SpaceX, and you've recently launched the first FIA-approved commercial pilot of Parallel Systems' autonomous freight rail platform with G&W. Can you discuss what the pilot is about and why it's important?
Sure. So the pilot is 7 phases, but the most important thing about it is that it's about product market validation in a real world setting. So we've been developing this product over the last few years, and we've been testing over a private track. But what's really important as the next step is to actually verify and validate the technology as well as the operating practices with a partner like G&W so that we're prepared to start looking at commercial service with this. It's also been a great partnership with the FRA to look at what rules and safety controls need to be established for a technology like this that is well outside of what rail traditionally has been. But this 7-phase pilot allows us to carefully move through each stage and be able to introduce new aspects and make sure that they're working correctly as we advance to operating over 160 miles of rail in southern Georgia. And ultimately, this is about shifting trucking activity to rail and helping to create inland ports and services in Georgia around all the economic activity there.
Great, thank you so much. And I see that our moderator, Tony Hatch, has been able to join, but I'm going to invite
All right.
Tony. I'm going to invite Tony to jump in with the program. Tony, we've just gone through the first question to Matt Soule, and I'm going to invite you to go into the second question to Michael, if you'd like to.
Michael, we've talked a lot about this. As the CEO of Genesee in Wyoming, you were the first rail company to test the parallel systems technology. It was a hard struggle to get it through. We've talked about that. It makes you a pioneer in the space. Why did you choose to partner with Parallel? What do you think this means for the rail and transportation industries in the U.S.? How far can this go? Tell us a little bit about the experience you had trying to struggle to get this, not just, we're not over the goal line yet, but onto the field.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there to unpack, Tony, and thanks for joining us. I would say the biggest challenge of getting this to where we are today, and I think this is something that I actually posted on LinkedIn, because I think the biggest challenge for change is people view it as a threat versus an opportunity. And in our view, parallel systems is a great opportunity to expand really the addressable market for rail. It creates a new service product for rail, and it doesn't really replace what we do on rail today. So I think, people have to look at this as really an opportunity, not a threat. The reason that I got so interested in this was, one is Matt and his team are unbelievably bright people. Most of his team actually worked at SpaceX. And when I look at how complicated it is to take a rocket up into space, land it and catch it, doing this on the railroad should be pretty easy. But probably the most interesting thing about the conversation I had with Matt was Matt put a lot of time and effort into understanding the physical advantages of rail. And, he did all the homework to understand what it means to ship by rail, the sheer economics of steel wheel on steel rail. Matt looked at this 15 different ways from Sunday. And the reason I joined railroading 25 years ago was I was at Roadway Express when a Teamster strike happened. And it took us 200 drivers to move 200 trailers. And I look across the street and there's 150 trailers moving on a train with an engineer and a conductor. I said, that's a better way to move product. So I think the way Matt looked at this wasn't just a technological play, it was the economics and physical efficiencies of rail, and that was really attractive to me and one of the reasons we got into it. And then lastly, I think to me what's so attractive is it does create a brand new market for rail. Rail requires volume. We have historically needed shippers that ship a lot. Fortunately, as a short line guy, one carload means a lot for us, but as a class one, it's hard to handle one carload for 30,000 customers. This type of technology allows you to scale down rail and provide really kind of boutique service on low volume lanes without requiring big investments in intermodal terminals or, a 3-mile passing siding. And you can integrate this into existing rail service without really requiring a ton of capital. So that's the other piece of this. So it's just the sheer efficiencies of rail, the new market this creates, and then the service product it offers our customers who can't always ship, 200 containers a day going from point A to point B.
So do you think this is a perfect product, or I should say that? Do you think this opens up markets for other short lines or other short lines on your system or elsewhere? Because certainly that last point you made about expanding without a lot of capital sort of fits the regional and small railroad bill pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously where we're focused at today is kind of port related intermodal movements. But I'll be honest with you, if you really look at it from an innovation standpoint, 10, 15, 20 years from now, when I'm not doing this I could see a day where every rail car could have this technology integrated into it. And we run big trains from point A to point B, and a customer orders in their rail car by their phone. And you don't need local, I mean, really and truly, you wouldn't need a local servicing provider to take a locomotive and 3 cars there. You could order it in and really create that Uber-like rail service that, I've talked about. But, that's a long ways away from now. But, I could definitely see a pathway where you could get there with this type of technology.
Yeah, obviously as a rail analyst and someone who's known you for a while, I could ask you lots of questions, but we got a really good panel. And I fought like heck to get on here to be present on it. So I'm going to ask Erez, you're a veteran of the transportation industry. You've been in, on the transport on the carrier side. Now you're an investor. Can you share your perspective on the promise of Parallels platform? What investors are looking at it from the point of view of as an investor, foreign investors, what are they looking at this, and how big of an opportunity do you think autonomous rail in general, as one question, is A, and B, parallel systems within that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to also add on top of what Michael shared with looking at 100 people driving trucks versus one rail taking everything, this is the core problems that I think we can define in supply chain end-to-end is reliability. In one hand, you have customers that would like to get things fast or at least repeatedly at the same time. On the other hand, we have a fragmented industry that if you're talking about end-to-end, all the way from Asia to the door in the US, it takes anywhere between 30 days to 120 days to bring goods. Now, the problem with something like that is you can't plan. So when I talked in the past with customers, a lot of the time I kept hearing we're taking 90-something percentile, and that's how we're putting in our ERP. So people are basing it based on 100 days, 90-something days, even that the cargo is actually arriving way faster. And one of the key issues is that short distance in the few hours ride or drive from the ports, that's where you have quite a lot of trouble, especially on the West Coast when you see congestion and ports that are very, very busy, and it's very difficult to get inside and get stuff, and you need a tweak card and all this 9 yards. So just improving that, reducing the cost, but even more important, bringing it to efficient, repeatable transit time, this is going to be 100 millions per customer value for those people. So the market opportunity here is amazingly huge. Now, how do I see parallel fit into that? This is a very, very smart design of a solution, but not only that, very, very smart collaboration with the right carriers, the rail carriers, with the right partners in the market. I believe that Matt and his team basically brought everybody into a level, and I think Michael mentioned it, that the human mindset to change, that's really, really difficult. And trying to tackle that was not an easy part, but I think that Parallel is doing it definitely the right way forward. So I'm expecting big things out of this solution that's coming up. Definitely supporting it.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm not surprised, obviously, given where you are, but it's nice to hear you state it out loud. Mason, IMC calls itself the largest marine drayage company in the U.S. Obviously, where we're starting, we just heard in ports, Savannah, for example. So you bring an important macro perspective to intermodal freight. You see it sort of holistically. What do you think the implications are of Parallels platform? Who's going to benefit? How will various stakeholders benefit, and how will that impact the trucking industry and specifically the drayage industry once this reaches scale?
Well, I'd like to echo what Michael said earlier. I think a lot of people look at new technology as a threat and not necessarily the opportunity. And this is how we're looking at it as well. I mean, there are some significant bottlenecks in the intermodal supply chain, especially on the international side, from ports like Savannah to the inland areas of Atlanta and even locations all the way to Memphis. So my position and IMC's position here is that this is a new technology that is not going to displace drayage companies everywhere. I think it's going to help us in a lot of ways. There's been forever rail cars delivering to local warehouses, right? But typically the products that they have delivering to local warehouses are not your consumer grade stuff. This is bulk agriculture, aggregate, just name, fill in the blank with what could be delivered via rail car. Whereas this technology potentially unlocks that barrier where we can get containers close, and maybe not directly to the warehouse, but close to the warehouse, where we can change the dray from waiting 7-8 hours to get one container out in the middle of COVID to having it nearby and allowing our driver to deliver a multitude of containers in one day to a pocket of customers into one area. So what I would say is I absolutely see this as an opportunity. Even at full scale, I don't think it's going to displace the entire intermodal drayage industry. That hardly ever happens. But could it help the industry as a whole? I definitely think that this is something that is worthwhile and worthy of our attention. And Matt and Parallels team has built a great product to allow us to do that. So, I'll echo all the comments said before, and we see a great opportunity here for how we can complement what we're currently doing. And it might not look the same at full scale for what we're doing today, but nothing ever looks the same every 3 or 4 years, right? So this is what we're seeing, and we're pretty excited about this.
Can I just clarify? Are you talking about one of the possibilities here being a way of batching this, bringing them to a small area where you have several containers at once, so the driver then just does delivery, in a short haul, turns around, picks it up, takes another, as opposed to negotiating in and out of a port and through long traffic? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the port process has got to be the most consuming thing that our drivers do today, is that when they leave our yard, go to a container terminal in different parts of the country, we spend 2-3 hours just to get one container, and it's very inefficient. So if we're able to automate that process with the help of the parallel system, maybe to our yard or a nearby location where it's taking pressure off of, I mean, you got to think about this, all the vessels and container traffic are coming into this one location, and it's only getting worse. I mean, terminals are concentrating their efforts, throughout the country into a few select areas. But the problem is it's a huge bottleneck. So if you can spread that bottleneck out throughout the country or at smaller pockets, you don't have 13 terminals that are picking up 1 million containers like LA is every month. It's much more spread out. I mean, you might have 50 of these terminals that could change the way that our drivers operate. And also, to your point earlier, you might not have to have a TWIC card for every location, right? These are just smaller inland locations that are easier for us to operate in. So big fan of this, and I think that's got a lot of potential consequences for sure.
That's really, I'd love to talk to you further, but we got on that. I think that's really interesting. It's sort of a mini version of what BNSF is doing with Barstow, getting it out of the port of LA and then dealing with it, avoiding all those bottlenecks of getting in and out of those gates and getting around all the other traffic that's going. But to DeAndre, had a long time. I saw you briefly recently, but haven't spent a lot of time with you in a little while. So I'm glad to be here. You're the head of Intermodal at Uber Freight. Mike talks about Uber all the time in his speeches, mentioned it today. So you're one of the most, as it says here, but it's obvious, comprehensive logistic networks across the supply chain. And you're obviously very progressive. It's a company willing to take risks and do new things. So can you share your perspective on the needs of intermodal? And if you can zoom out 5 years or longer even, what do you think we're going to see out of this? And then how do you see, Parallel being a part of that story?
Thanks, Tony, and good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here, and great to be part of the story with Parallel, because to your question of what do we see as the needs for intermodal, I think I'd look at it from the shipper's lens. We do business with thousands of shippers each day, and what they say is they don't necessarily want intermodal as a standalone solution. They want intermodal to be part of the tapestry of solutions that ultimately answer their larger question. And the folks that are going to be most successful in their world are the ones that can answer 5 or more questions for them, like how can you handle my LTL? How can you handle my over the road? How can you handle my parcel? How can you handle all segments of my transportation? Because if you can do that, that gives me more optionality in what I can do with you versus going deep down one of those singular verticals. So I think what intermodal needs is it continues to need more participants who are speaking to more of those solutions. And that's why I think Parallel has something here, because what shippers want, if I put my shipper's hat on and think about something being imported into the U.S., I don't necessarily care as much how it gets conveyed to my DC and to my ultimate customer. I just want it conveyed ultimately to my DC and my ultimate customer. And so what's in that? It needs to be reliable. It needs to be efficient, both from a cost perspective and all the other things that drive my value perspective. And cost will matter ultimately. And so as we think about that, they're thinking of how do I segment my freight in a way where I have the most options over time, so that not just one act of God or one incident can throw my supply chain into a tizzy. And so that when they think about that, they want as many forms of capacity that are speaking to the same need and their ultimate need as possible. If I zoom out 5 years and what will intermodal look like, I think on the positive side, I think it could be a tremendous growth story. I believe intermodal can more than double in North America, and I'm speaking of the rail portion of intermodal, particularly even domestic intermodal. If I think about the demand that's out there, there's certainly a marketplace for it. But what we're going to have to do as intermodalists is we're going to have to figure out how to speak to those shippers' ultimate desires, which is someone that can speak to many things versus just saving them costs versus over the road. We need to be able to speak to how reliable can we be. We need to be able to speak to how visible can we be throughout their supply chain. We need to speak to how visible we can be across multiple modes within their supply chain. We need to think about how we dive into their audit and pay and their freight systems and their ERPs so that it could be one continuous solution for them. So if we can answer those questions affirmatively, and I know we can, and I believe the marketplace will, then I think this is a multiples of what we're doing today because the demand is out there. On top of that, the dynamics of the freight may look a little bit different, and intermodal can shift with that, whether it's coming into the East Coast or the West Coast, whether it's coming into the North or the South. Intermodal can shift with that, and I think intermodal is part of the answer to that. But we have to be plugged into shippers in a way where we're answering more solutions than just, can I save money versus over the road? They're astute. They get that. They understand that. We've got to be able to answer, I think, 5 or more of their questions in a big way, in a cogent way, so that they want to shift more, not just to intermodal, but to our networks in general.
That's very good. We'll have a follow-up, a lightning round question, but where would you, on a 1 to 10 scale, put your confidence that the railroads on their side of the intermodal, supply chain can accomplish those things? You talked about reliability, the whole visibility into pricing and ERP and all that stuff. What's your sense of the big company's ability to pivot like this?
I think I have a high confidence in the railroads that they can do it. I don't think it's a matter of can they. I think we have to be intellectually honest with our shippers about what intermodal can be. I think when we're trying to tell our shippers more broadly about intermodal that it could be as fast as truck, I don't know that shippers are asking us for that. I think we're answering a question in our own terms about how we can turn our assets faster. I think our shippers are saying, hey, I'm okay with the extra capacity. I'm okay with the lower cost. Just give me something that's consistent that I can plan on. And our rail partners have shown that they can do that. I think when we get off script is when we begin to say we can go faster and get closer to what truck is, because ultimately, if you're 2 days over the road and you're 5 days intermodal and you save 1 day intermodally, I don't think shippers are as concerned about that, unless you can shave 3 days and be the same as truck. I think what they're asking you for is, hey, can I save money? Yes. Do you have capacity? Yes. Is it 5 days or 6 days? If you say 5 or 6, I don't think that it's material to them as much as there are some shippers, and I'm talking around the edges. I think there are shippers that does matter to. But I think it's can you do something consistently the most cost efficient way that your railroad can do it. And I think the railroads get that and they understand that, and we've not had a shipper tell us that they can't ship rail because the railroads are ineffective at understanding that. I think it's when we overpromise and underdeliver is when the railroads and us get into trouble.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go back to Mike.
Tony,
I want to come back to you to follow up. What do you think the biggest barriers are to broad industry adoption of technologies such as parallel systems. You think that the U.S. rail industry is ready to? I mean, I've seen you speak on this topic a lot. Are they ready to take up the sense of urgency? Are they ready to embrace autonomous rail and other technologies? You had again ultimately successful but frustrating time. You and and Matt talking to the FRA. That looks like that may be a change dynamic. But do you think the mindset is there? Secondly, you mentioned threat before. Who do you see as being potentially, maybe not incorrectly, threatened by parallel systems?
Hey, Tony, before I jump on here, Erez, I think you had a comment.
Yep.
And if you want to go ahead, I'll follow up.
Yeah, please. Sorry, I can't see you all, so I apologize.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Just to add on what DeAndre and Mason mentioned before, the beauty of the solution is that everybody is going to be benefiting from it. Rail basically today do not take anything short because of the cost of that and the complexity of that. So it's always long distances. So definitely it's a beautiful new market for the rail. On the other hand, the drayage company, as Mason mentioned, they don't want that long-term waiting at the port or the long drive. I can tell you that the average in the industry is anywhere between 1 point something to 2 point something turns per day, which is extremely low. That's very not low utilization of your drivers. I think in LA is 1.8 if like a good provider. Now, if you can actually take away that cargo and putting it in an off-site location, through the parallel system, that's where you can do much shorter distances back and forward and increase your turns per day, per driver, of course, to a much higher number. Now, the customer will benefit potentially a lower cost, even that still everybody's earning whatever share they used to earn before, because now you have a better solution to operate such a solution. And of course, a higher reliability. So everybody could benefit out of this solution. And that's what is the highest promise here, because there's nobody going to lose something here. There is the trucking company is going to gain more business and faster business. The rail company will gain more business because there's something that they don't do today. And the customer is enjoying cheaper, more reliable solution than they used to have before.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's great. Mike, to you, there was technology, specifically autonomous rail, but technology, sense of urgency, FRA experience, and could you just delineate who might be wrongly thinking that be threatened by this when you use the word threat? And I just wanted you to clarify that.
Yeah. So I think there is a sense that I think everybody in our industry, and I don't think I'm talking rail carriers, I'm talking rail suppliers, I'm talking customers, even our regulators have come to realize technology has to be embraced.
Yep.
Obviously, each one of those has constituents that they have to manage through. And when you think about threats, labor unions would be one that considers this a threat. And I can tell you, at least on the roads we're testing and piloting this will create jobs, not take jobs away. This is actually capturing freight we don't have today. It'll put more tonnage across a railroad that's lightly ran across. It will create more track inspectors. It'll create more maintenance away employees, maybe more signal maintain, whatever. To me, that's one area that believes there's a threat, and that's the labor unions. Another area could be the drayage companies, and having Mason on this call is a great example of somebody at the drayage side that says, you know what, this is a better technology for me. It's a better technology for the dray community. I mean, you look at Savannah alone, they do about 11,000 gate moves a day. If Parallel was to take 20% of that volume and move it into inland terminals in South Carolina, Georgia, or Tennessee, everybody in that supply chain wins. It's 20% less waiting in a queue to get into the port. It's 20% less trucks running through Savannah. It's 20% less trucks running inside and out of the port terminal. I mean, there's so many advantages here to what Erez was saying. Everybody wins in this solution. But I think everybody's worried that this will change the whole supply chain. This doesn't change the whole supply chain. It actually just makes the supply chain better. It leverages the benefits of the technology to places where there's the most friction And when you eliminate that friction, every participant in the supply chain actually wins. So, I think even the railroads look at this as, oh my God, this is going to blow up my intermodal network. No, it's not. We're still going to run 2-mile long intermodal trains from LA to Chicago. We're still going to run intermodal trains from Savannah to Memphis, but we don't run intermodal trains from Savannah to Macon, Georgia. And this creates a platform where you can do that. And I think everybody just has to step back and not look at this as a threat, but really look at it through the lens of what does this actually mean for the business? Because if we don't, you're going to have people like DeAndre and Uber that's going to be moving autonomous trucks down the highway in Texas, and it's going to expand across the whole country. And now rail becomes even less relevant than it is today because you're not competing against an asset that has the same cost structure anymore. So, I mean, to me, there's so many things, but it's really just taking this lens off your eyes and saying, let me look at this completely open-minded, and how does this work for everybody? And I think the beauty of this panel, when you look at all the participants, everybody brings a unique perspective. And I think that highlights why this product is so good for the supply chain itself.
I think that's a great answer. Do you think the railroads, when they said they're worried it's going to blow up their intermodal network, are they worried about their line haul capacity and running this stuff through while they're also,
Well, I mean, that's obviously one of the single biggest concerns, Tony, and that's why we've started this integration on a low density line.
Yeah.
But as we move on to the Georgia Central, it'll be integrated into the dispatch system. The beauty of this technology, you don't need a 4,000-foot siding, a 10,000-foot siding. You need a 100-foot siding for these little bogies to drop off into. Their braking distance is so much faster. They can run as fast as a freight train. I mean, have you ever been on a railroad, even the highest density railroad, where you didn't see capacity? I mean, there is capacity out there. It's just how do we integrate into it and maximize it? So I think as you prove this out, this will actually become not a big concern. But I do think that's a concern that people worry about is, will this take capacity off the main line? And our view is it won't. It just has to be integrated correctly.
And I know we've got to move on, but in other conversations we've had, you mentioned that while a lot of short lines are non-union, the railroads you're testing on are unionized, right? Have you been able to successfully explain the more jobs theory that you proposed just a second ago? And have you ever sat down? I would guess that it would probably be the Teamsters that are the most, that ultimately will be the ones that need to be convinced if this is to be a national, continental-wide technical application. Have you talked to them?
Well, I think we've talked to every labor union that could possibly be affected by this technology. We've invited them to demonstrations. We brought them into the tent. And we firmly believe and have communicated there's not a loss of jobs here. That doesn't mean they believe us. But I think we have to prove it. I mean, at the end of the day, this is new technology. You have to prove you can bring more business to rail. We have to prove it creates more jobs. But we're going to be very transparent as we go through this process. As you know, we're an industry that has not grown in 10, 15 years. If we don't grow, the jobs will go down. So, my view is we're in this thing together, union or non-union. We're trying to create a platform here to grow this industry that will benefit everybody. And we're just going to be transparent with all the labor unions as part of this.
One of the issues I've seen, everybody agrees railroads should grow, but it becomes an intramural fight. You may be growing more jobs, but you may have to, they may be going from one union to another. Now, while as railroad employees all are benefiting from this, the specific needs of the president of such and such a union, may cause an issue. I mean, we've seen that with conductors, brakemen, and engineers in the past, right? So it's complicated, but I agree with you in what you usually say. It's got to be done. Railroads have not grown. They need to grow. We need to shift to a growth perspective, as Keith Creel keeps arguing for, and all of them now.
Well, Tony, I started my career in a LTL Teamster environment.
Yeah.
You know how many Teamsters work in the LTL industry today?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to evolve, you have to adapt, or you don't survive. Period. End of story. We have to do this.
We could go on a whole nother one about union strategies and whether they're so focused on preservation rather than modification, adaptation, and growth. But that's a different topic. I mean, it'll be something you'll be discussing there. anytime there's going to be change, there'll be barriers and old ways of thinking. And I'm guilty of it. Is it's change is hard, but it has to happen. And in this industry, as you constantly point out, we need to ramp up the sense of urgency. And I think these successful tests will help. And so I'm going to turn to Matt for the last question before what we're going to call the lightning round. Although any of you that want to jump in, and I really appreciate Erez, you doing that, so you feel free. But Matt, we're talking really on the U.S. We're really talking about Georgia and South Carolina here. Have you seen any traction outside of the U.S.? There's, I would think that there would be great understanding of this kind of innovation. Having been to Europe several times, look at Intertrans and looking at rail there, they seem to, in some ways, they're behind us in terms of heavy haul railroad, but in other ways, because of their rights they seem to be willing to take more chances. Have you looked in Europe or Australia or Brazil or other areas where there may be support for this product?
Absolutely, and we have. And what we're solving for here, Tony, is a opportunity worldwide. All of the barriers we're working to overcome here exist across rail systems internationally as well. We are presently also active in Australia. Australia is a great market because the regulatory structure is inherently accommodating to new technologies. You have a existing path and you self-certify, or you can make a safety case argument for new technology. And so we've already been on mainline track in Australia last year, and we're excited to keep working on deployment there. And we're also active in the US. And I think for a startup company, we have to be careful about not getting ourselves spread too thin, because each geo we take on has its own unique regulatory aspects and considerations, and building those relationships both with railroads and shippers. So that's where we are right now. But we have a number of relationships we've built up in Europe, and Michael and his team have on many occasions said this is likely even better in Europe, where frequently there are much tighter constraints on the length of trains that challenge their current economics in ways that we don't have to experience here in the US. Trains are usually less than 800 meters long there. And just to touch on what everyone has been sharing here, there's a couple, and bring this home, there's a couple observations that we had in the early days. Number one, rail is very energy efficient, so we should be moving more freight by rail, as well as the public safety benefits and decongesting the highways. But the other observation was trucking is a 10 times bigger market in the US specifically. So why is that, right? Is it simply because of the reach of the network? And as we peeled back the layers and talked to shippers like Maersk, we understood, what Michael said, people love the variable capacity rail. But as Erez and DeAndre have talked about, people don't love the variable service quality. It doesn't necessarily need to be super fast, but it needs to be consistent. And ultimately it needs to be considered door-to-door cost. Otherwise, I don't think shippers really care how it gets there, as long as it's predictable and has a reasonable interval to it. And you're accounting for the door-to-door cost, which means in the case of rail, you got to push the drayage costs down. This is what we need to solve for. And so it was that information that we drove the architecture of this vehicle, which is to have inherently faster asset turn. The most important innovation we're developing here is to have truck competitive economics at small scale. And that's the key ingredient to getting further into the reaches of the rail system, so that we're getting closer to customers and shippers and reducing drayage costs. That higher asset turn also reduces the amount of CapEx that would traditionally go into opening a new rail lane. But most importantly, we're going to be able to deliver on better service quality, daily or multiple times a day service.
I think that's great. Australia presents all sorts of unique challenges, as does Europe and the train lengths and whatnot. But you're a unique solution, so it'll be interesting to see. I agree. You don't want to spread yourself too thin. You got a lot here riding on in Georgia with Genesee. I was told we should do a lightning round here to close, which is really ask futurist moment to look at the rail industry 3 to 5 years out. I'm going to do a self-advertisement. I wrote a report on the intermodal sector of the rail industry, which talks a little bit about Parallel, although I know a lot more about them than when I wrote this report last fall. So take a look on IANA's website. It discusses what I think of the future of the intermodal industry. But I love these, since this is a rail-focused panel, and there are lots of ways to look at that Parallel. Each of these panelists, and I guess why don't we go in the reverse order? So DeAndre to Mason to Erez to Mike and closing with Matt. So where do you see this industry looking 5 years out? And if you also have another point that wasn't, or a comment on something I or others have said, usually lightning round, we don't actually have a clock. So we want to ask you about 3 to 5 years out rails and anything else you'd like to say.
Thanks, Tony. I'll kind of add on to what I said earlier and just close the loop on one thing. So I think 3 to 5 years out, we will be successful in intermodal if the conversation we just had was from the shipper's perspective. If I put if a CEO of a large CPG company or a CEO of a small, someone that's got $50 million of freight under management, we're listening to railroads or everyone in the intermodal space talking about, extra capacity, which is, all Matt's talking about, innovation, which is all Matt's talking about, capacity, which is all Matt's talking about, that could serve you as well or better than what you have today. And if someone says, well, I don't want that because it may disrupt me, I think that CEO would ask you out of their supply chain because you're not looking out for them. And I think we as intermodalists have to remember that the shipper is the one that's going to drive our change, and they want capacity, reliability, and optionality over the long term to meet their expectations. Again, I go 3 to 5 years out. I believe intermodal will be earning its right to grow. I think shareholders won't be passively resisting it as a share gain. I mean, fundamentally, if we look at intermodal share of the pie, we're less than 6% of the pie. And that's too fruit of the plane for us to ignore the opportunities that these shippers offer us. And I think as we began again to recognize that shippers do a lot of different things, and the folks that can answer multiple things, not just intermodal, but multiple things across their supply chain with technology and innovation, are the ones that are going to drive the growth, not the ones that are just coming in with price per se. That'll be important, but shippers are becoming more astute. They understand that their supply chain is more important. Their supply chains are changing, and they want someone that's vertically integrated across their supply chain to help them from when it leaves Asia or Europe or wherever it starts till it gets to someone's door. And the more folks that can do that are participating in intermodal will drive the growth for intermodal.
Thank you. Mason, I guess that was you next.
Well, DeAndre, that's a hard one to follow, and I really echo your drive for the customer, because what we're really talking about doing is taking away some of the pain points that customers have today with intermodal, whether that's lack of service or hard to get to boxes, all the specialty rules, scat codes, all of the above that makes intermodal like a really tough business. I think you're eliminating some of those restrictions and with this solution. And I think if we can find a way to, in the next 3 to 5 years, to really dive into this, I think it's going to create a lot of opportunities that are different than today, but also just nonetheless truly good opportunities for the industry as a whole, from a shipper standpoint, from a provider standpoint, and a rail standpoint. I think this solution obviously does a whole lot to that. The one thing that I think I'll add to it that hasn't been brought up quite yet here would be what would this potentially do to cargo security and how goods are shipped across the country. If you think about the rise in theft over the last 3 years in intermodal, in over-the-road trucking, there's a lot of fraudulent actors out there posing as legitimate carriers that are just signing up to steal freight. And I think this potential industry makes that a lot harder to get into. It's got some rail vulnerabilities if it's going to be stopped at the side of the road for a little bit, but I think that this definitely opens up a great opportunity to try to tackle that in a different way that the industry is not really tackling today. So that's my hope, is that this becomes a more efficient solution to the customers and the people who interact with the rail every day, as well as providing a more safe supply chain for shippers that are looking for that.
Yeah, I've just been made aware only recently of the fraudulent part that you described of people signing up to steal freight. I mean, it's the brazenness of it. But we are aware also of breaking into, in the Alameda corridor. We saw those pictures a year ago of, all the Nike shoes strewn out all over the place. People were stopping trains. So one of the things we'll have to worry about, this doesn't make parallel systems any more, vulnerable than moving trains are attacked. So that's a rising issue. We could talk about another, in another day. Erez, what do you got for the rail industry 3 to 5 years, and any other points that we haven't made or that you'd like to add to, please?
Yeah, thanks. So I definitely see a much more reliable end-to-end supply chain coming up to us in the next 5 years, where parallel is a crucial element on the part from the port to the next step. I also believe that sooner or later we will see the original vision that parallel had with the automation of the loading and unloading. Of course, you need the support of the union here. And probably that could start in the remote location where probably not at the port to start with, but on the other side, you can load, unload automatically. So not seeing it coming in the next 1 or 2 years, but in 5 years, that could add huge value to the cost and efficiency of loading and unloading stuff from the rail and making even better the reliability of that supply chain.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess, Mike, we're coming down the home stretch. I was told when I started as an analyst in this business in the late 80s, I hate to even say that out loud, that if railroads could solve their consistency issues, everything a lot of you guys have said here today, they don't need to be the fastest, and sometimes that's even disruptive of the system. It's just if you say it's going to be, back then it could have been 7 days, just get it there in 7 days, not 5 days, then 10 days. I was told this in the 80s, I said, and I always used to, when I speak, and you've heard me, I get up and say, well, now that we've solved that problem, we can move on to others. And obviously, we're still trying to solve that problem. And and technology is one of the big ways that we could not employ back when I started that can be employed and are beginning to be employed here with Parallel today. Where do you see the industry in 3 to 5 years? What point have we not made, or do you want to comment on what your fellow panelists have made, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think on the comment made around security of the commodities themselves and theft, in phase 5 of our pilot, and Matt and I haven't talked about this, but I know they can come up with this solution. We're supposed to upgrade the vehicles to enhance reliability and performance. The fact that these vehicles are so automated, you could geofence. If somebody breaks the seal outside of geofence, I'm sure Matt could do a little electric jolt, and affect abilities of people to breaking into these things. So there's probably ways to make this a lot more, I would say, difficult to steal from than the current train system. But I would say for us, the single biggest thing, Tony, I think we have moments of greatness when it comes to consistency at the railroad. But the one other variable railroads have to sell for is ease of doing business.
Yeah.
We're inherently not an industry that is easy to do business with. So I think technology has a great opportunity to enhance the ease of doing business with the railroads. So I see that as definitely something that as technology gets a bigger hold across the industry, and we've entered into partnerships with other railroads, whether it's Rail Pulse or whatever. We've got to get that moving, but I think in 5 years you'll see an easier service product that the railroads bring to our customers. For G&W, I would say in 5 years from now, I definitely would hope to see Parallel in 3 to 5 different areas of our business. It probably very similar looking pieces of our business, but 10 or 20 years from now, it could look something different. But definitely port to kind of secondary and tertiary markets that are underserved today, primarily handled by long dray movements. I could see Parallel being part of that solution for us for sure. And then I think the other piece of this, and Matt and I've talked about it, they're really focused on getting through the pilot and getting this up and running. But when you really open up the hood of what's inside of this technology, there's so many other things we can use it for. You look at autonomous inspection, you look at rail car inspection, we have portals and we have, autonomous vehicles, but, there's nothing that this couldn't run by a train on a siding and inspect all the bearings on the side of a rail car. Just go by and scan everything and pop it. You don't have to have the train run through a portal. So I think there's all kind of technologies that will come out of this. Obviously you got to focus on what we're trying to do with this, but the underlying technology has so many other novel concepts that you could put to work here. And then lastly, I truly believe when you really look at what rail can do for our country, truck is always going to play a role here, but at the end of the day, they control the freight market. I mean, they move the vast majority of
Yeah.
the traffic. And for me, it's about modal parity, allowing us to create solutions that create more parity in the modal network. This will be our truck-like service product, but we're not using the interstate, the highway. And as things kind of work themselves out, if truck had to pay their fair share for going across the interstate versus rail going across rail, the economics would change significantly. So I think rail has to become part of the solution long term, just to take some of the pressure off the infrastructure of the U.S.
Do you think, and this is a lighted question because we got to get to Matt, do you think that we now have blue skies ahead of us in terms of trying new technologies from a regulatory perspective?
I definitely think the current administration, whether that's the DOT, the FRA, all of them believe technology provides a better solution. And I think for our standpoint, we just want the ability to be at parity with every other mode of transportation. Sure. I mean, you have autonomous trucks today operating on interstate systems, and we're having to go through a tremendous amount of effort to do autonomous rail in the North American system. Not that we don't want to do it, make sure it's safe, but we need to be at parity with other modes, just to be competitive.
It's a private system with private police, and people do trespass on it, but they're not supposed to. As opposed to a public road, that is inherently not modally fair, right there, right? But
it's definitely better today than it was 6 months ago, and I think it'll continuously get better once we prove out how safe this technology really is.
Hearing you two speak, and Matt, I'm coming to you with a question at a railway interchange / the RSI meeting in Indianapolis. It was interesting also at that meeting to hear the permanent political head of the Federal Railroad, non-political head, Carl Alexi, who is the permanent, guy who was there as opposed to the political head who's replaced David Fink coming in. Talk about parallel systems is one of the things he was excited about as a regulator. So that was a big positive in Indianapolis when the FRA said that. And with that, I was not stunned, but I was really surprised that they would choose that as opposed to track inspection. And that really shows how far along you guys have gotten with your conversations. Matt, you're the host. Sorry for having trouble getting on and missing your part, but I've heard you talk about it. Can you close out with your view of the next 3 to 5 years and anything that we have missed, that you maybe want to highlight that we got off, that I took us off tangent or whatever?
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. I'm gonna echo what a lot of people have said today. We're going to be deployed. We're going to be deployed in the U.S. and we're going to be deployed in Australia. And I think that Parallel is going to have a manufacturing backlog problem, and that's a good problem for us to have. But we're going to accomplish that by continuing to partner with innovators like G&W and shippers to deploy and pilot this and validate it, because we've been fortunate to work with G&W who really understands the benefit of this, and they've been outstanding as a early embracer of this. And those pilots are going to de-risk a lot of these aspects and prove out both what this means for transportation and shippers, all the service quality we've been talking about. And I think that's going to create a lot of demand that's been kind of waiting in the wings for this to be validated in that type of setting. But I also think that introducing a technology like this is going to help encourage rail to maybe modernize in other ways that can benefit their entire platform, right? The digitalization of their shipping systems and how that might integrate and make it more seamless for different shippers to choose that. Like, think about like the impact that travel websites had, where you could just book a ticket, right, and let them figure out all the different options in front of you. So I think there's a lot of benefits that are going to be unlocked with this pilot, early deployments that will provide evidence that this is a big game changer and shift and opportunity for rail. And I think that we could even see reevaluation of maybe investing in new infrastructure. Like you look at like what Brightline is doing to use like highway rights of way for building new rail. I could see a future where that becomes a viable option for creating like these freight corridors, creating new track that exists in new rights of way that can help take trucks off the road and use rail as preferred means of transportation for that freight.
Hey, Tony,
Well-
to that point, I would say there are some places we've looked at that have truck-only lanes in their highway plans. And in all honesty, when you really start looking at the cost to do truck-only lanes versus a rail solution, it's scales difference in cost structure to put a rail line in versus a truck-only lane. And, you know, obviously you got to have the dray on both ends, but you know, I think Mason would much rather have his guys operating 20-mile circles than 200 miles across, you know, heavy traverse interstate system. And if it's truck only lane, probably gonna have to pay more to do it. So I think Matt's onto something here where this could be an outlet for getting, you know, taking money that could go into building roads and putting in some, you know, median rail service that could provide access to certain markets.
That could be a wild. It would require a different mindset in rail to government interaction. But you know, if the economics prevail, and they usually do over time, that would make a lot of sense. You know, economics will beat politics if given enough time. I believe that. And this is, you know, I think this has been terrific. I'm not sure, Dan, if we're supposed to close out now or you want any more. This will be available to all of you who signed up, so you can rewatch parts of it, or if you had to go and take an important call, and you can reach out to me and certainly to Parallel and Matt if you have any further questions about various markets, applications. Australia, that's really interesting to me. I'm going to follow up on that, Matt. And I guess, Dan, if you're there, are we ready to call it?
Yes, sir. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. We want to thank all of our panelists for participating, Tony for doing an outstanding job moderating this conversation. Please think of this as the first of more of these kinds of conversations to come, hosted under the auspices of Parallel Systems. So thank you all very much and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.